And I do a lot of cybersecurity research, and it's mainly focused on Windows environments and Windows malware. I know cybersecurity can be a very big, I would say, market, or in terms of various avenues or areas to specialize in. So personally, I've worked more on Windows systems. A little bit about myself, in terms of hobbies, I like farming. I do, for my relaxing time as off screen, I do a lot of fishing, and not the fishing of emails, which is all part of my work, but then this is now the actual fishing of catching fish in the waters. I used to be a DJ and focused mainly in electronic music, and I really like eating food, and I'm a coffee lover. So if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see a lot of that. What are we going to cover today? So basically, as the title of this presentation states, it's detection mechanisms around some common red team TTPs. So we're not going to go through all of them, and you will notice on the screen that the each one has some unique number tagged to it. I will explain those in just a second. So the various TTPs that we're going to look at today, and as I said, it's not an exhaustive list. This is just a few of them. The first one is going to be PowerShell for initial access and command execution. Then we're going to do account discovery, that's looking for various other accounts that would be on the machine or on the network. Then we're going to do persistence. Persistence is basically retaining that foothold that you've got on your target, so that even if a reboot happens or internet gets disconnected, and rather we'll focus not internet disconnected, but let's say the user goes home and comes back the next day, you don't want to send them a fish again. You want to have that foothold waiting for you. So that's what persistence will cover. Then we're going to do a bit of network discovery in terms of shared folders on the network and try to access files that may be on these shared folders. Then we're going to do also credential dumping, which is a very common technique that's there. So some of these are not very common, but at least the first one, partial initial access and credential dumping, is very common with the tools that we're going to use today. And finally, after credential dumping, we're going to do lateral movement, which is now pivoting from one machine to another on the network. Now, as I mentioned, there's some tags that are there in red. These tags are basically the techniques. So as I mentioned, this is TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures red teamers use. And since there's so many of them, there's an amazing organization called Mitra Attack. They have come up with a framework, and I think if you go and check on their website, they have also I think they've set up a new one called Miter Shield, which is more for the blue teaming, so that whoever is in a SOC or a defense side of cybersecurity, they can start putting rules and detection mechanisms for the various TTPs that red teamers do. Whereas the attack framework works to showcase the various tactics that red teamers or threat actors would use against an organization. So these unique codes are there so that it makes life easier. Instead of remembering the full name of a tactic, it's easy to just quickly go, because as I told you, there's a ton of them. I highly recommend you. Sorry, I didn't put the link for the Mitra attack, but I will share it with you. It should have been at the bottom of this slide. So that you can go and check out the other techniques that are out there. And some of them, as you see, I might just indicate persistence, but then persistence has various sub-techniques. So that's why I said some of these have sub-techniques that we may cover or may not, depending on time. But let's see how it goes. So what we're not going to cover. We're not going to cover setting up of an Active Directory. I'll share these slides with you. So there are links that are on it. So whoever wants to go and set up these for their labs, they can go ahead and use these links to set them up. So as I mentioned, We're not going to do the whole setting up of the AD. We're not going to set up elk and SIEM. We're not going to, I'll be using for this demo a command and control channel server called Covenant. So I'm not going to discuss about setting all that up. And no, we're not going to go discuss about AV and EDR bypasses in this specific presentation. But that's now homework for guys to go and do so that you can now come back and continue. Once you've done these setups, then you'll be able to follow along doing the rest of what I'm going to show you today. So why PowerShell? So there's a company called Red Canary from the US. They tend to do a lot of threat hunting and defense work for their clients in the based in the US. And they came up with a threat report for 2020. I think it came out last week but one. And within the report, the number one attack vector that always popped up was called command and scripting interpreter. And within that, there are two main tools that are used for that. There's either going to be PowerShell or Windows command line shells. PowerShell is native to all, I think from Windows 8 upwards. It comes already pre-built in your operating system, and it's mainly used for administrative purposes. But as the word hacks mean, hacking is not a bad thing. It's just knowing and understanding something deeper and finding ways of misusing it for your advantage. So that's what adversaries and threat actors have been doing. So PowerShell was built to administrate Windows environments. Threat actors and red teamers have found ways of abusing this for their own advantage. And by that, the report that came out, you could see that out of a total of 4,798 threats that were detected using that were pertaining to the command and scripting interpreter, almost half of them were PowerShell related. And that's why I said I'll be focusing on one part of this, because once you go to the MITRE attack, you will then go and start mapping out also what Windows command shell does and various other command execution interpreters. So that's the reason why I chose PowerShell for this, because a lot of environments that I have done pen tests and red teams in locally have always had PowerShell accessible. So it's something that's really commonly abused. And I wanted to showcase how people can develop detection rules around these things if they need to have PowerShell enabled in the environments. So the scenario we have is, this is my little lab that I've built. Basically, the structure is, there is a switch that connects an Ubuntu SIM. So basically, I've set up Elk SIM. Elk is a logging management tool. It was actually built as a data collection and big data analysis tool. And then guys have found new ways of using it. So as more and more people started getting logs enabled in their environments, they needed to be able to quickly sift through these logs and get results fast. So Elk became quite an industry standard for using data collection and analyzing the data that you get. So over the years, because of the use case in cybersecurity, they actually went ahead and developed like a fully fledged SIEM. So if you actually go to the the Elk's website, Elastic website, you should be able to get the Elk SIEM. And in the slide, as in the previous slide deck, you could see I've also put a link on how to set up the SIEM. Then we have a Windows Server 2019 domain controller and just one machine because it's just a small network. We're just trying to showcase the attacks here. So we have one single machine, which is called HR01, and we have the domain controller that it's connected to. And then on the same network, we have a Kali machine that's running Covenant, which is the command and control. So there's no redirectors, there's nothing complex, nothing fancy here. This is mainly just to showcase how we can detect the use of these TTPs on this network. So before we go too far into the demo, there's some things I just needed to give an update on in terms of what else I've done on the network. So I've added 2 deception tactics for today's demo, specifically towards what we're trying to showcase. I have set up a Honey account, and I've set up Honey files and folders. So basically, as the term Honey means, and if you've been in cybersecurity, you may have come across honeypots. So basically, this is taking the same concept of using either very, how would I put it, low-hanging fruits, I'd say, on your network, such that if a threat actor or a red teamer trips them, they should trigger an alert in your SOC. So I set up these 2, as I said, a Honey account on the domain controller called admin01. And then also on the domain controller again, I have created a folder called confidential, and I've put a text file called credential.txt in it. We'll see that in action as we go ahead. I just need to explain what these 2 do. And also to set up these things, I have a document which I will share with you guys, how to quickly just set up these in your environment so that you can be able to track going forward if you set up the ELK stack in your network. So demo time. As I mentioned, for this, I will be using a Kali machine. And on it, I have a basic Covenant setup here, nothing fancy. I've not done any modifications. This is a pure repo pull down. The only difference maybe is this is the developer branch, because I will show you something I did for the last, if we have time. I have another server which is more obfuscated, and also that it does not flag every time I'm using it. And hence why I said this talk is not going to be about antivirus bypasses, but rather, even if your antivirus is disabled, are you able to see if there's malicious threat actors operating in your network? So that's what we're going to do. And then at the end, I will have a fully updated Windows machine with antivirus running, and then we'll try the same tactics on it, but using a different Covenant server. So as I said, this webinar is not going to be about setting up Covenant. You can, the slide decks has a link to where you can download Covenant, and there's a whole wiki on how to set it up and use it as part of the GitHub repo. So feel free to go and read through it and familiarize yourself with it, because it's a very nice command and control infrastructure, because it leverages more of .NET than even PowerShell. But for the initial execution in this demo, we're going to be using the PowerShell side of it. So once you have your Covenant server up and running, it's all web-based, so you'll be given a link to access it, which is usually your local host, and it runs on port 7443. It's advisable to change these default ports if you're going to be using it on your cloud infrastructures, but for demo and testing purposes, you can just leave it as is. Then just if you guys have ever used Metasploit, you know the concept of a listener, because it's a command control channel. You're going to have agents or beacons, or in our case, in Covenant, they call them grunts. You'll have grunts that will speak back to you once the execution has happened on the target. So be it a phishing link that was sent, or they open a binary or something, and it executes our malicious code that gives us the command and control. So I've just simply set up, this is the IP for my Linux machine. I've set up the listener on port 80, so it looks like HTTP traffic because it's an HTTP listener. And it's a very basic listener. I have not used any custom profiles, anything. It's just using the default HTTP profile. As I said, once you start working with Covenant, you'll start understanding what these are. So Covenant has a number of launchers. So if you go to create, you can see the various launchers that it comes with. For this demo, I created a PowerShell launcher. So I can even just quickly just do another one so that you can understand how to do it. So you create PowerShell launcher, it'll give you a lot of these configuration things to be done. I know my victim is running .NET, I think it's 4.0. So I can leave this as a .NET 5. I think it's, yeah, because it's a Windows 10, so it should be running with .NET 4.0 and above. You can give it a name that you want, so we'll just call this test. Now, Covenant comes with three types of implants. There is the Brute. A Brute is a .NET Core based implant. So it can work on cross platform, meaning it can work on Linux, Windows, or Macs, meaning it can target any of those three operating systems. Then the other two are the major ones that we use. So the Grunt HTTP is basically a Grunt that will operate over the HTTP protocol. And then you have a Grunt SMB, which utilizes an SMB protocol to communicate between a Grunt and another Grunt. So this is more for lateral movement, but we will not cover that right now. So if you're setting it up, you'd probably just use the Grunt HTTP. I'm not using any certificates. There are certain configurations here. So delay is basically how long it takes before a command, before the Grunt communicates back to the command and control server. For now, it's been set to 5 seconds. You can set it to as low as you want. Ideally, you can leave this as is. So once you've got all that ready, you're ready to set up your PowerShell script. You just say generate. Oh, sorry. This is where I was saying that the .NET version. Yeah. So you need to. So once you change the grunt to HTTP, you can now pick the .NET version. So here I know it's .NET 4.0. I'm going to put a delay of 1, and I can click generate again. So once it generates, it'll create this long script with obfuscation and everything, but I'm not going to use that. I had already created this Shehacks PowerShell launcher, so we'll just use that. Once you've generated, as you've seen how I did it, you can go and host your file. By hosting your file means that you can come here and say where you want the file to be located. If you say test.ps1, and if I say host, you'll notice this there's a shortened version of the PowerShell script here. So this because it Covenant runs as a web server as well, it's able to spin out for you a directory where it stores your path to your files that you want to host on your web server. So you don't have to do Python, simple HTTP server or Apache or whatever. It does it inbuilt within the framework. So if I copy this and now I go to my victim. So as I said, we have an HR machine here. So as I mentioned, since this is a default Covenant setup, you will get flagged by AV like crazy. So for this instance, I have just turned everything off apart from tamper protection so that we can just have a smooth demo. But as I said, at the end, if we have time, I'll try and showcase using Covenant with all the protection mechanisms turned on. So if I did I copy that command? Copy this. Yeah. So if I just run this command, this window will disappear, and I should trigger AV that something has happened. Yeah, you can see even with AV turned off, it still gets flagged. Now, this is mainly because of another tool called AMSI that's running in your machines. So Another thing you can do for homework is go ahead and read up about AMSI, because all antiviruses plug into AMSI to be able to detect in-memory execution. Because basically, this PowerShell command, the IEX, is an in-memory cradle that will execute this PowerShell script directly in the RAM, in memory. So it does not touch disk. Nothing has touched disk. Everything is happening in the memory space. So to bypass that, I can just run this. So there are lots of AMSI tricks you can use to kill it. There's actually a very nice site called amsi.fail by an individual called Flangvik, who has gone ahead and he's taken up various combinations. Like this is the one I just used, but it's originally by Matt Grabber. And if every time you hit generate, it's going to generate a different type of AMSI bypass. So you can feel free to test out the different ones that are there, and they should all at least disable AMSI for that current session that you have running. With AMSI off, I will try running that script again, and I don't see any AV flagging. So if we go back to the Covenant server, you can see a grant has checked in. And if you come now to your grants, you should be able to see this. So the one which just checked in, okay, I didn't get the name, but it's there. So we have an active grant that has come in. And as I said, I have set up Elastic SIEM on the Ubuntu machine. So I've accessed it here through the web portal. And as it has the Swift on security sysmon rules activated on both the HR machine and the domain controller. Now, with those sort of logs all being sent in, as I said, this is the default Swift on security sysmon logs. There's a lot of telemetry and information that will be sent. As you can see, in the last 45 minutes, there's been 3,458 different logs that have been sent to this, and this is coming from just 2 machines. So for this, I will just bring this down to the last 15 minutes so that it reduces the noise that we're working with. So within Elk, once you log in, this is what you usually come to, and there's a dashboard, and from there we'll use the Discover segment to now go and filter through the various logs that are being collected by Elk. So these are the logs that have come in the last 15 minutes. We've already had 1,201 hits. Now, since we've already got the first grunt going, and we know we used PowerShell, you can simply use this detection rule. Sorry. So I have a little bit of a cheat sheet, so I hope you don't mind. I will share this as well. So we have our first scenario, we have our honey account. So yeah, so we've bypassed, I don't know if you guys can see this. So we've used the bypass for AMSI, and then we triggered the PowerShell script to be executed in memory, and we had a successful grunt communicate back. Now, if I'm on the defense side, how would I be able to detect if a PowerShell script like that has executed in my environment? So using this rule, if we just go into Elk again, sorry, I just put that there. It'll tell me how many times. And so in the last 15 minutes, as you can see, since I have 2 grunts, as you can see 1 and 2, we can tell definitely these are the ones that executed, and you can even see the time that they executed at. So this should be a way one can use to detect, especially this in-memory PowerShell Cradle execution. And if you go now into the actual details, there's a lot of information that Elk gives you. Some of the key important bits that we'll be looking at on this particular one is this segment called message, because it actually has the command that was executed So you can see here, there's the command line execution. So we can see what was executed on the victim machine, and it has that PowerShell cradle. So if you're on the blue team detecting and you're not, your users are like an HR machine, why would PowerShell be running on an HR machine? So you can use these kind of rules to start now drilling down and trying to detect the use of PowerShell, especially in memory cradle execution. So that was the first segment on initial access. So we have initial access as a threat actor. So this presentation is going to be going a bit of both sides in terms of the blue team and the red team. So we're going to switch back to being the attacker now, and we'll do the next phase. So we've covered the T1059 initial access tactic. Now we're going to try doing a bit of account discovery on the network. So this is falls under the T1087 tactic, according to MITRE. So we have some commands we can use. So I'll just use any grant from here. Interact. So the first thing I always do, even if I've bypassed AMSI on the main command prompt, I just like doing this because AMSI is also a very difficult thing to bypass. It's very trivial to bypass, but it can cause a lot of pain if you're on the red team or adversarial side, because it can get you busted so easily and you lose everything that you'd worked for. So with that, so we're just going to enumerate the domain users that are on this network. And you can see we have a few accounts. We have admin01, administrator, default password, there's a KRBTGT account, and L Grossman. So even the account that I have actually logged in as is not there. So if I do a quick who am I, you can see I'm here as Doug Speedman. So it's not even shown up here, but these are all being pulled out from the domain controller. So we've done a bit of domain enumeration. Can still do a bit more. Let's get some groups that are there on the domain. So these are standard things that operators would do. I mean, once you get an initial foothold, if you look at the, I think it's called the Lockheed. Is it Lockheed? No. Attack matrix. Is it the AD? You'll see there's just like in every what do you call it, pen testing or cybersecurity engagement, there's always going to be enumeration and all those kind of things. So this is what we do with ADs. If that's visible, let me see. New tab. So big picture here. Okay, cool. So basically, this is what we've done. We've gotten the initial compromise, and now we're going to do like a bit of local privilege escalation. Compromise more credentials, and then do some recon and further privilege escalate into the domain. So that's why I said these are some of the tactics. I'm not going to do every bit of this whole attack life cycle, but we're going to pick different segments of this, which is highlighted in what this presentation is going to cover. So as I said, since we've done a bit of enumeration, what would the blue team be looking out for? So on the blue side, there's a few rules you can use to check for these kind of, what do you call them, enumeration. Now, the fact that Covenant is running through the PowerShell interpreter, it will keep logs of the commands that are passed through PowerShell. So it's easy to collect, just like how we could find the exact script that was executed. we should be able to see the various commands that are then passed through that PowerShell interpreter. And that's why they said this is purely focused on what's happening in PowerShell. So the rule we've used is check for all PowerShell based alerts. And within the alerts, look for a command line that has the value net. Because when we did the enumeration, we had used the basic Windows enumeration commands of net user and net groups and stuff like that. So basically, this should have definitely left some footprint or command line arguments that were detected and logged. So as I said, if you come down to message, it usually gives you the full detail of the command line that was even executed. And you can see from which machine it's coming from. So that will definitely, you can see it's come from HR01. And I think it captures the IP somewhere. That's a full, yeah, the IP is here. Yeah, so this tells you that some malicious activity has happened on this machine, and now somebody is enumerating using this machine. So it's going to be a lot of combining of these logs and you fine graining based on your environment. Because as I mentioned earlier, maybe you don't need PowerShell running in your environment, so you can completely disable it, right? So this is just showcasing on the PowerShell side of it, but there are also other detection mechanisms that can be used to look through these kind of logs. So once we've done enumeration, I will, on this current developer edition of Covenant, I have noticed a bit of a problem with this tool called, or rather this module of executing assembly. So what the beauty about Covenant, as I said, because it's a .NET based framework and it's working fully in memory, leveraging the CLR in Windows, you can pass .NET based compiled binaries and execute them directly in memory without touching disk. So I'll try and see if we can run SharpHound. SharpHound is a tool that's used to collect information about an Active Directory environment. And basically it, so basically when you run Bloodhound, you're able to get information about the various users that are on the network, the various groups that are there, and a lot more information about how the privileged user access rights are set up on that network. So with that information, it's, as I said, for an attacker, if you're enumerating and you get that information, it's then easy for you to know who are the domain administrators, who are the users that can be easily targeted, and you start making your moves towards exploiting these various avenues that are detected. As I mentioned, I know this current version has a problem. I don't know if it'll execute, but we will see. It's still active, so that's a good sign. Tasking. So the beauty about Covenant is whatever you do, you can always go back and see the history of the commands that you did. And that's why I said it's a very good command and control infrastructure if you're working in teams, because you can have multiple users connect to a single server, and you can go and get all the data of whatever you've been executing based on the different listeners and all those kind of things. So if you've collected any data, all that stuff starts getting populated here. So taskings is basically whenever you, as I mentioned, like that execute, as you can see, that has died. So I guess because of the execute assembly issues that the current version is having. I will show you this in the other one that I set up. So going by these, if we go to, yeah, so as I mentioned, the tasks that we did here show up in taskings for this specific grant. So we bypassed AMSI, we did the net user to get users within the domain, We did net group for the domain, and we tried to execute sharphound. So if I go to my taskings here, you will see all the taskings that have ever been executed on this command and control server. That's even for previous machines that were attacked. So I'll go back to my grants. For now, we'll go to now the detection. We've seen how net can be. Since we can't do the sharphound one here, I'll just have to show it in the other other command and control. Just let me know if you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so unfortunately, because that assembly load is not working, this would have been the detection mechanism to try and detect the use of Bloodhound on that target machine or HR01. And as I mentioned, because Bloodhound is a user enumeration tool, this event action is what detects the use of Bloodhound in your environment through the PowerShell command line. So that covers the account discovery segment. So once you've gotten your foothold, even before doing account discovery, one of the key things that some threat actors would do is to retain persistence, which, as I mentioned, is having that foothold still be there. Like you just saw in the example I showed right now, my grunt, when I executed assembly, it died, meaning I lost that connection. Now, if this was a phishing mail, I'd have to do the whole process again. But if I get that initial foothold and immediately I set up persistence, then I know even if I lose that connection, I know this user will, at the end of the day, will go home. So they will most likely shut down the machine, or it'll lose that connection. But when it boots up again, it will it'll execute my malicious code and give me a connection back. So that's what persistence is. So we'll again bypass AMSI. As I said, even doing this, it's still a headache, but yeah, it's always worth doing it. Now for the persistence, I'm not going to use the inbuilt persistence techniques that come with Covenant. I'll just show you two different techniques that you can use by just running commands directly on the machine. So there's one persistent technique called run once. So, or it uses the run keys. So if you look at this current command here, basically it's going to set up a new registry in the victim's machine, and it's going to be executing this executable that's located in the C drive every time the machine is rebooted. So basically that's what this regadd command does, which is basically the run persistence technique. Then the other technique we're going to do is the schedule tasks. So this is actually one of the most highly used, I'd say, persistent technique. Even ransomwares use this. So schedule task, if you're in a blue team or in defense side, this is one of the things you should always be looking out for in your environment, why schedule tasks are running if they have not been set up by the administrative staff. So we go back to command and control. So we're just going to add that registry key. And if it runs successfully, you should get a command executed successfully. I hope that thing has not died. This one interact. Let's go to this. Still there. Why it's not showing that? Okay, let me give it another task. Okay, so that completed. So let me just run this again. Okay, if that doesn't work, I'll try the schedule task one. Surprised it's not working now and it was working earlier. Ah, there. So at least the schedule task one works. I don't know why the red one is not working now. So with this, you can see a task has been created called My Tasks, and it's been set up to run every day at 9 a.m. So this one is a bit iffy because of the time-based constraint here. If the user switches on the machine at 10 a.m., then definitely this scheduled task will not run. But if the user leaves their machine on the whole night, the next day at 9, definitely it will run. So even if the user is not switched off or anything, I will get a second uh, grunt calling back to me. And to verify that this has actually run, we can check if this task was created. So can do yeah, and you can see it was created today. Its next run is going to be tomorrow at 9 a.m. So if I put a malicious binary in this directory and name it macrosec.exe, tomorrow at 9 a.m. it will get executed because the scheduled task will run, and hence I will have persistence on this machine. How can we detect these happening on your target? Again, the same thing as I said, you will have to just use the PowerShell rules. In our case, we use the scheduled tasks. And you can see it's come up twice because I think we ran one to check if the task has been created. Yeah, this was to query whether the task was created. And if we go to the other one, so process create rule name. Yes, so we have this. So this was still querying my tasks. So you see, every time we've targeted those queries, we get an alert back. We can query for that alert within Elk Stack if we know what we're looking for. So this was the one which was creating the task itself, as you can see even from here. And if we go down to message, I believe it will have the entire command that was executed. Yeah, there you go. So this is another way we can, and you can see again which machine did it. It was the HR machine. We have the timestamp and we have the IP. So for the blue team, this is a lot more information they can use to work with and know what malicious activity is happening on the victim's machine. So that covers the persistence detection for at least for scheduled tasks. I'm sorry, the reg seems demo gods against me. So Bloodhound didn't work. That's that one. And Regad, I'll find why. I'll find out why they didn't work. So remember, we created, or rather, I created Honey files and folders and Honey accounts. So this is where the tripwires now start coming in. This is whereby if somebody tries to access these, they should be a huge red flag to you. So if you look at the different types of querying commands that we use for ELK, you can actually specify to which machine you want to monitor on. So as I said, in our environment, we only have two, so it's not that difficult to get the computer name. Oh, sorry, it's here. Yeah, WinLog computer name. So I can change this to, so in the scenario where we're going to be detecting the use of these shared folders, considering they're on the domain controller, you will have to set up the detection rule on that domain controller. I will explain also what this 5154 means. So let's first go through the attack. So to just know where I am, again, situational awareness. Oh, shit. So this is just so I can know what's the server of this, what's the domain controller. So that's the name of the domain controller. And then I can use net view. And this should list out to me the various shares that are there on this domain controller. So you can see there is a folder called confidential that's on a shared on this shared drive on this. I'll repeat that. This confidential folder is a shared folder located on the domain controller, which is basically the honey folder that we have set up. So anybody trying to access the contents or even just trying to view what's in here, it should create a tripwire because nobody should be looking into this folder. If you've set it up as a honey folder, nobody in your environment is meant to be looking into it. And if somebody is, then somebody is trying to do something malicious in your network. So that's the whole idea behind this. So once you've done that, we can go and see if we can, I'll have to run this one because I think I've already set that. I'd already done this earlier, so I'm sorry for that. I need to delete that and then rebuild. So basically, we know, we've seen the folders that are there. We know confidential is there. I want to know what is in this confidential folder. So this is what I was talking about, the accessing of the files or just viewing what's in there. So the alert that has been set up on this specific folder is that even if somebody is just viewing, it should trigger that something malicious is happening, something not right is going on. Okay, sorry, this one. Yeah, so I need to map that share and then access the file. So you'll see that right now. So we have mapped the drive F to this location. So now from there, I should be able to see what the contents are on that drive F. Please tell me it's not died. That's the one. One. So it's still showing as uninitialized. Okay, let's see just by mapping this confidential folder, because that's trying to access that folder. Has that also just created the alert that we need? So we will use this rule. And I will, as I said, I'll explain what this number means at the end. So let's see if that will pop up in our logs. And we have 2 hits. So you see, if I was a blue team, I don't know what's happening. If I see this pop up like this and I see it's the confidential folder, immediately that should tell me, yo, somebody's doing something nasty on our network. Now, this event ID 5145. So you just go and do sys1 event ID. So you can see it says a network share object was checked to see whether client can be granted desired access. The fact that I'm just trying to see if I can get access to that folder, and as I said, it's not, nobody's supposed to be accessing it, should mean that something malicious is happening. So that's why with that rule, knowing that that folder is located on our domain controller, as you can see here, and the folder name is called confidential, and if I see this event ID that somebody tried to access it, I know somebody's trying to do something fishy on my network. So again, that's a deception mechanism you can utilize in your network. So we didn't even have to go through the whole thing of going and actually trying to open the files that are in there. Just the fact that I mapped it to the drive F, because it's now trying to gain access to this, it created that alert. So we have now covered the network share discovery segment of the TTPs. Then we have credential dumping. Now, I don't know how many of you have heard of a tool called Mimikatz. It's one of the most loved credential dumping tools by threat actors, especially when it comes to Windows networks, even. And now I think they're also extending its functionality towards Azure. So cloud AD environments are also can play victim to this. So for Mimikatz to work, there is still also one extra condition. You need to be a privileged user. Now, I will try some tactics to get, will I do, let's see if it'll work. Okay, so for me to do this, sorry, I need to go back here. I will need to run this as an elevated user. So this is where I was saying I'm not showing you like the whole process of the different attacks. This is now assuming, let's say I do get privilege access now on this machine. So this is how then I can then leverage Mimikatz to then dump out credentials from the machine as well as from the domain controller. So CD. And again, I will do the bypass. I think we're using test. Yeah. So with that done, if I go back now to the covenant command and control server, yeah, so you'll see a new grant getting activated, and you'll see there's this thing called integrity. So the original ones we were working with were running in medium integrity. The reason why it's called medium is because the user that is currently logged in, this Doug Speedman, has some form of administrative rights, but is not the full domain administrator, hence why it's not running in high integrity. But the moment I opened the PowerShell command prompt in an elevated as administrator and ran the commands, now we got this new grant coming in as high. So with this one, we can then try and run Mimikatz. But before doing that, I will try running Mimikatz in the medium integrity one and see if it will create any alerts as well. Though I know, as I said, it should not work. So Covenant comes with some Mimikatz modules preloaded. You can just use them as is. This being the development edition, it runs the latest Mimikatz. That's the reason why I installed this one here. Because in the one that my daily driver does not have the latest Mimikatz, and the latest Windows 10 knows about the old version and it blocks it. So as you can see, the error has already popped up. I'm not a privileged user. So I'm not able to get a handle on LSAS. LSAS is where Windows stores credentials for various processes and as well as for various services that may be running on a machine. So since this has not run, let's just see if the detection rule would still work. I doubt it because this requires a granted access. Here, search rules. So PowerShell again, event code 10, touching LSAS, which I told you is the process where credentials are stored. But this one is specifically saying a grant access was granted. Let me just see without that if we get any alerts. And as you can see, because Mimikatz didn't work, it didn't bring any alerts. But now, if I go and run now Mimikatz in the high integrity grunt, we should be able to get some credentials from memory. This one. But as I said, standard, I'll always start with bypass AMSI. Please don't tell me to not work. Yes, it does. Ah, there we go. Cool. So at least Mimikatz has worked and it has dumped out stuff, details from memory about various passwords and hashes that could be stored on the machine. So this is the user I'm currently logged in as, and you can see this is the NTLM v1 hash for that user. We didn't get a clear text password. Now remember when we did our previous tasking, so I'll just, we can see that we found an admin 01 on the network, and we found a password stored here called legit password. Now, if I'm a threat actor, if I see that, I'll probably assume that this is an administrative account on the domain. I'll probably have even done some enumeration to see what this account is all about. And now I have the password. And as I said, the whole point of deception is to create low-hanging fruits for the threat actors to leverage. And by them leveraging these low-hanging fruits, they then trip the detection rules that they're actually doing some malicious activity on the network, therefore binding their operation. So the blue team wins, technically. So if I was a threat actor, I would have definitely logged this down and probably tried to use this to access something later on. We'll get around to that in a bit. But for now, our focus was getting Mimikatz running and seeing if we get a detection that it ran successfully on our environment. So we'll use the same rule again. It's actually there. And this time, if I run it, it should give me, yep, that Mimikatz ran. So you can see the yellow parts are highlighted. As I said, it's that process, touching LSAS process always creates this event code 10. And as I said, because we know Mimikatz deals with LSAS, so definitely LSAS will be the target process that Mimikatz is trying to interact with. And this 0x1010 is a granted access, meaning the request to LSAS was given access. This is a very bad thing for you to see in your network because that means somebody has been successfully able to dump out credentials from memory for that particular machine. So that's the detection rule we can use around credential dumping. So that's the last bit. And the last segment is going to be lateral movement because, hey, we got this admin user's password. So let's see if we can access something else on the network. So with the Covenant, it's a bit of a process about getting it around, but we will do it just to showcase how that's done. Go back to my grunt. I think I'll try and do it from the medium integrity. So let's start with process. No. Command. Migrant. So basically what the command does, let me just show it on this side, it'll be easy to read. So basically this is going to create a grunt that will access the domain controller using the SheHacks PowerShell script, and it will utilize the user admin01 and the password legit password to execute this PowerShell script on this machine. So basically that's what command is supposed to do. And of course, we're going to get a failed because this account, definitely this password is not the one for it because it's a honey account that I created with a wrong password. And I will show you also how to create that I'll send the document on how to create these tokened accounts in your respective individual users' machines, not on the domain controller. So to the bad guy, they'll just assume, hey, something's not right. Maybe the password has changed. Life goes on. They continue doing what they're doing. For the blue team, we get an alert. Why has this user admin01 tried to log on to any device on the network? Because it's not supposed to be an active account. So we will use the domain controller to access the event IDs and logs for this specific account. And again, I'll explain 4625. If you again just do Windows event, come on. One, is it again? Sorry, 4625. 4625. Event ID 4625 basically is a failure for access. Unknown username or bad password was used. So that tells me that somebody tried to access this admin account. As you can see, the event code is there. And the account that we're supposed to be monitoring is there. So if I see this, it's a failure logon information. I know somebody was trying to use that admin account. We can even see if it was using the password that was set for that account. So if you go to message, as I told you, message gives a lot of information. So failed to log on, and I'm using a bad password. Yeah, so it doesn't give the password that the user tried to, because we're looking at it on the domain controller side. Had we been monitoring on the HR01 machine, then it would give a different, so let's see, HR01. See if it will give us that same event ID. It might not give us that, so if I remove this, so yeah, this one will give the command that was executed with the details of okay, so it doesn't even pick the password that it tried to access. So let's see if it password again. Legit. Yeah, so okay, so it doesn't capture the password, but it'll at least alert on you. As I said, this account should not be active, so we should not be seeing this. So the admin01 and the confidential folder things should never be appearing on your timelines at any point if you're on the blue team. If you see them, then definitely somebody is doing some malicious activity on the network. Was there any other one? So yeah, that brings us to the last one, which was lateral movement. And that's the end of the demo side of things. Let me see if I can spin up the other Covenant server and just give me a second. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to unmute and ask while I'm doing this. You will notice a bit of a difference within this one. Yeah, so this doesn't have the regular Covenant things because I have modified this a little bit so that it does not get the regular AV signature detections on it. So yeah, the same thing. I've used a listener, but if you look at this listener, I've used a specific custom profile. So if you want to know what the profiles are, if you come to listener, you go to profiles, you can see the different types of profiles that are there. The default is what automatically gets selected. A custom profile, within a profile, there's certain details that are there. So you can change the agent that calls back. So for mine, I don't know, I think I used, yeah, it's a Windows, but I think it's Chrome instead of Firefox. Yeah. So I changed the agent that would be, so if somebody is trying to monitor for the default Covenant profiles, they would not see it because this is a custom built profile with its own different strings. So I've changed a few of the things like the HTTP GET response. I think I even changed the post request details. So you can develop your own custom profile, then link it to your listener such that whenever communication is going between your agent, I mean your grunt and your victim, it uses that custom built profile. So go to launchers, it's the same regular stuff. Please just, these are all my previous tests that I was doing earlier today. What did I want to show? So I have to go to my Windows machine and enable AV. Oh no, please don't. Uh, okay, phew. Okay, cool. Sorry about that. My machines are starting to go on overdrive. Come on. Well, that is happening. I'll go to this. Mm. So for this one, I will use the regular HTTP server to send my payload on. That's on. Hope my machine is woken up. Okay, try to log in. Yeah, as I said, if anyone has any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask. Let me just read the chat as well. Yes, all the tools I'm using are open source. I'm sorry, Emma, if the screen was not clear. About the mute, that was, I think, addressed. I can hear. Uh, I believe when I tested it earlier, I didn't need to be elevated to access the registry, because you as a normal user can modify certain segments of the registry, especially the HKU local user part. If you're going to system, then that's a different segment. Into YouTube. Okay, I'm really having a problem with my audio. I can't get anything. 3 more minutes. Okay, cool. So let me just quickly, Felix, thank you for squiggling the screen. Okay, this is hanging, so I'll just showcase this some other time. But basically, there's a way of using, as I said, the whole framework, modifying it and using it for your normal day-to-day command and control services without all these AV shenanigans coming in the way. There's ways of obfuscating and using encryption to mask your malware, and you should be able to get your initial access. I don't know if I have, I think I might have closed it, but let's see. Since it's taking ages to open, hope this loads. Grant. Should be this one. So this is the normal grunt that gets generated from, what do you call it, from Covenant. And you can see it has quite a number of detections. It has there are 12 out of 26 AVs that can detect it. If I use the one which I modified, see how many, this one. Yeah, it only gets detected by 7 AVs. So you can see I would have been able to bypass all of these antiviruses with the modified version that I have. So if I was going against asset, I'd have to probably do a bit more work, but it's definitely possible. Yeah, and I guess that brings me then to the end of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Labu. Labu, there's one last question.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've addressed it in the chat.
Let me have a look.
Okay.
What are some of the best books or resources on setting up or modifying a SOC or SIEM tool? Very nice question. And I'll be very, very honest about that. As I said, my research work and most of this day-to-day stuff that I do is geared towards the red teaming side of things. So honestly speaking, I would not be the best person to answer that in terms of what are the best resources, but there are definitely resources out there that you can use. First of all, just start looking at using Splunk and Elk Stack for your socks and seams, because these are open source. So they can easily deploy them even in your home networks at almost no cost. If you have an old laptop or even a virtual machine, as you saw, the one I have there was taking logs of up to 3,000 events in 15 minutes. I mean, 1,500 events in 15 minutes from just two machines. So you can set up one on a virtual machine and then deploy it. But honestly, as I said, I'm not from the blue team side, so I would not be the right person to guide you on where where to get these resources from. But I believe if you contact me on Twitter and stuff, then I will be able to share something with you directly based on my own findings as well as I go along. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. Yes, it's John says it does. Does anyone else have any other question? All right. This has been an amazing session as usual, Labu. Thank you so much. For anyone who wants to review the session we've had today, we have the video up on our YouTube, so you can go over it again. If there's something you missed, you can always find it there. And yes, I just want to say thank you to everyone who's attended, and thank you as well, Labu, for joining us again. You've been a very helpful member of the community. It's always a pleasure to have you. Eve, do you have anything?
Maybe one last comment. I think Laura, this would end an impromptu session. I'll just ask Labu, are you available for Thursday? And always an answer is yes. Thanks for the support you provide. And I think the team always enjoys to be with you and for the key support that you provide through the different bootcamp sessions we've had together. So that's it, Laura, for me. Thank you, everyone, for attending the session and have a good night ahead.
Thank
Okay.
you,
Good night.
guys.
Yeah.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you and good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night. Good night.